Thank you, Kyle Kalinske. Guys, check him out. Yeah, the Turkey
President Lula
situation. The whole Turkey situation is really terrible, and I hope everyone, you know what I mean. I hope everyone can get out of that, in one piece. And I know everyone can't, but shit. The only earthquake I've ever felt, and I don't even know if it was an earthquake. I think it was an earthquake, but it was when I was little. In PA. My dad was tucking me into bed, and there was like a little bit of a, literally, I don't know, it was weird. It was like a little bit of a shake. And that's the only thing I ever felt, though. I don't know what the fuck that was. I don't know if that was an explosion nearby. Like, I don't know. Felt like an earthquake, though. Um, let's talk about Lula smacks down CNN host.
President Lula da Silva of Brazil recently came to the U.S. for a visit, and it seems like he was a busy man. He was hanging out with Biden. I'm unaware of what issues in particular he was pressing Biden on, but knowing the kind of a politician Lula is, I'm sure he was trying to get his view imparted on Biden on a number of issues. He also had a meeting with Bernie Sanders.
Ooh.
That, of course, lit up left-wing Twitter. He did an interview here with Christiane Amanpour, and Breaking Points found this clip. It's really interesting. They're talking about the Russia-Ukraine war, and he talks about what his role is in the war and on the international scene. And he kind of smacks down Christiane here. So let's take a look, and then I'll explain more about Lula's foreign policy and why he would take the position that he's taking here.
Like you're going to come up against President Biden on a key defense of the United States of democracy around the world, and that is Ukraine. You do not believe, I don't think, in the Western support for Ukraine's defense, and you have said it many times. Why not? I mean, some people have asked, in fact, an article, why is Lula so committed to democracy at home and not abroad?
Well, I am highly committed with democracy in any part of the planet Earth. What I believe is that in the case of Ukraine and Russia, it is necessary to have someone talking about peace. It's necessary that we should build up interlocutors to talk with the different parties that are in confrontation. That's my thesis. We need to find interlocutors that could sit with President Putin and show to him the mistake that he made to invade the territorial integrity of the Ukrainian territory. And we have to show to Ukraine that they have to talk more so that we can avoid this war. We have to stop the war. And so why I'm going to talk with President Biden. I don't know what he's going to say to me, but what I want to say to him is the following. It is necessary to build a set of countries to negotiate peace.
And he asked you to send his leopards to Ukraine, and you said no.
No, it was not the tanks. It was ammunition.
Okay, ammunition.
I didn't want to send, because if I sent the ammunition, I would join the war. If I sent the ammunition from Brazil, the ammunition that you're asking for.
But you just agreed that it was defense.
This will take us to war. I don't want to go join the war. I want to end with the war. I don't want to join the war. I want to end with the war.
So that was really interesting. That was a very interesting perspective because, look, the way that the United States looks at it, or I should say the way some people in the United States look at it, is by us giving Ukraine weapons, we're just effectively aiding their defense against an aggressive invader, an imperialist invader.
Okay.
And so that's why I think many people, and understandably so, say, yeah, I get it. But at some point, the question does become, well, is there a difference between quote-unquote defensive weapons and offensive weapons? We're also kind of engaging in a proxy war with Russia by doing this. And then what's the limiting principle? Like, how far are we willing to go? Because at the very beginning, Biden ruled out certain kinds of weapons as, hey, that's too much of an escalation. And it's almost like we're asking for retaliation from Russia if we cross a certain line or certain lines. And then as time has gone by, it's like, nah, just send them everything they need. Now, look, again.
Does Kyle Kalinske have green eyes? They look kind of green.
I get it. I support Ukraine and their territorial sovereignty, and they were the ones who were invaded. They were the victim. So this is a rare instance where the U.S. being involved, at least in the sense that they're providing some semblance of weaponry so Ukraine can defend itself, it's not nearly as morally egregious as like our illegal and offensive invasion of Iraq or our invasion of Afghanistan and occupation of Afghanistan, or our illegal drone war in the Middle East, or our shadow war in Africa. I think there's more of an argument for what we've done there, but you got to realize you're constantly playing with fire because Russia is a nuclear-armed country, and the cries of World War III of like, hey, be careful here, we're treading on thin ice, those are legitimate. I don't know how to get through to people that it's not hyperbolic to say we're playing with fire and this could very easily spiral out of control into World War III. Because if you do this tit-for-tat escalation and then you just run it out a year or two more, at some point, there's a point of no return. So
True.
How do you deal with this? Well, what Lula da Silva says is, effectively, hey, I'm a pragmatist. Even if Lula had the same sort of moral intuitions as many people that, yeah, Ukraine is defending itself, so they have every right to defend themselves, so I'm fine with aiding them to defend themselves. He's saying somebody needs to play the role of mediator and person who negotiates and person who gets everybody in a room and person who says, hey, I have no dog in this fight. And so let's come to some sort of an agreement and some kind of terms here where we can escape, and it's not the worst case scenario. There was a big story that broke a couple days ago, which the U.S. media didn't cover at all, which is Naftali Bennett of Israel came out and said, we basically had the outline of a peace deal between Zelensky and Putin, Ukraine and Russia early on in the war, and then the West came in, the U.S. came in and axed it and said no. So now you can make the argument the U.S. was saying we don't want to engage in appeasement and give Putin a lot of what he wants, thereby incentivizing Putin to go further and take more territory illegally. I understand that argument, but nobody even knew that this happened, right? That this was on the table, and it maybe could have been an actual solution, albeit an imperfect one, a solution that makes everybody on all sides mad, but it could be better, of course, than a worst case scenario. So there was the potential of a happy ending, or at least a less bad ending, if you will. So just to put this in perspective for you, this is the kind of guy Lula is. We've talked about this before. His foreign policy approach is basically sheer pragmatism. According to The Economist, Lula had a pragmatic foreign policy, seeing himself as a negotiator, not an ideologue, a leader adept at reconciling opposites. As a result, he befriended, not briefed, both Venezuelan President Hugo Chavez and U.S. President George W. Bush. Lula also gained increasing stature in the Southern Hemisphere through economic growth in Brazil. In 2008, he was said to have become a point man for healing regional crises, as in the escalation of tensions between Colombia, Venezuela, and Ecuador. Former finance minister and current advisor Delfim Neto said, Lula is the ultimate pragmatist. So in other words, this guy is outcomes-based. He's, how do we de-escalate? How do we find a road out of this? How do we find some semblance of peace? And he's working with people who many people would consider, and maybe rightly so, monsters. But he's not drawing hard lines. He understands we have to engage with the world as it is, not as we wish it would be, and we have to try to make lemonade out of lemons.
I agree.
That's his foreign policy approach summed up. And so I'm happy that somebody is trying to play the role that Lula is playing with this role in Russia and Ukraine, with the illegal invasion of Ukraine by Russia. I'm happy that somebody's trying to...
I'm glad Lula's at least asking for peace, and he's not like a war hawk or whatever, just trying to go to war. I'm not saying that Ukraine shouldn't defend themselves. I'm totally pro Ukraine, I'm also like, I hope Russia stops. But we'll see what happens, man.
Play the role of the objective arbiter who, comes into the room and says, let me hear out everybody and let's try to find a way out of this. But what's crazy is that it's viewed as controversial, right? Like, it is viewed as controversial. Why? Because, in the U.S. media, it's just Putin is Hitler. And so anybody who is trying to find a way out or some sort of peace deal or do some sort of negotiation with Hitler is viewed as, you're just Neville Chamberlain, who's viewed as like the biggest rube in modern history, right? And so I get where they're coming from with that perspective, but I just think it's very rigid. in not entertaining the idea that maybe Putin's not Hitler, right? He could be evil, he could be a dictator, he could be all these terrible things, but also could be more connected to reality than a guy like Adolf Hitler. And
Yeah.
again, I don't think that's a controversial statement, but some people would find it controversial, right? They don't understand that there's like a spectrum of evil. And, you know, we live in a very nuanced and complicated and complex world. It's not as simple as like, everybody's Hitler and that's the only analogy you can make to history.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
like, yeah,
True.
that is the perspective of many people in U.S. media, many U.S. politicians. And so, you know, Lula will be castigated for this, but I'm happy that somebody is trying to play that role because it's always worth a shot, right? It's always worth a shot to try to find a way out of this because the alternatives are terrifying. And I think Lula understands that. And so much respect to him. And you could see that Christiane Amanpour, CNN host, it's like it's not computing what Lula's position is.
All right, folks. Next one. Thank you, Kyle. I love you. Kyle, you are amazing. Okay.